This is when you are going to have to be present. This is when you do not have to be present. In fact, go away. And it's very important for them to understand that they are not bearing the burden of that process. They're simply being shepherded through it.
I would love to ask you a little bit more, Meena. What about that, even if they're not strictly a qualitative researcher, it could be a designer who wants to do some research per se, or would they want to do the research to inform their designs or their decisions? What tips do you have to someone to say to their product partner, slow down, give me the opportunity to do this? What kind of education or partnership tips do you have there?
And Jen, I know this. There is a 2x2 that we've put together at twig+fish that has helped us really explain that. And if we think of this 2x2, and one vector specifically is to inform product or to inspire design. And that is our horizontal vector on the 2x2. And if I focused on that alone, that is our way of describing where people who are hybrid kind of folks, so the unicorns, so to speak, of I'm a designer and researcher, or researcher and designer, in whatever order you like. In those situations, we have them really focus on the product side. Because at the end of the day, if you identify more as a designer, which I don't know as many people who feel they're strong researchers or their primary goal is to conduct research activity and they dabble in design. Like, I don't hear that as much. I hear it the other way, which is I'm a designer and I dabble in a little bit of research. But when you are a designer, I firmly believe your goal is to solve. Your goal is to generate solution. That's what your passion is. And you're probably very good at it, or I hope you are. And when we think about designers, then, if we place them on the product side of the fence, so to speak, to inform the product, they really thrive there. So this is talking about how to potentially co-create, do co-creation activities with participants, or potentially doing some sort of evaluation like a usability test. These are natural to a designer because it is all in the moment of solutioning for the product. Where I tend to push designers away a little bit is when we start to think about how to inspire to advance the product, how to inspire so that we start to learn from the humans around us. That's where I ask researchers to really focus. And the reason is your job is to go in and purely listen to the story. You need to be almost expert listeners. By the time you, Jen, as my participants, start to talk and you start to tell me about how you are combating the heat and the heat wave this summer, I'm not already trying to solve for it in my head, and I've actually lost half of your story. I think that's really important to understand, that you have to not only be able to hear the whole story, you also have to have skill in eliciting that story. So it's two sides that I think that's where the super skill of somebody who is in research and is a researcher day in and day out, especially with qualitative research, you need to know how to get the person you're talking to or the people you're talking to unpack that story, to unravel those things they tend not to talk about, to take a moment and almost go, why do I clean my house that way? Like, they need to think about it themselves, because they're not waking up every morning going, I'll tell you why I clean my house this way, Jen. It's not what they're thinking about, right? They're thinking about, gosh, got to get breakfast on the table and then maybe run out the door and catch the bus or whatever it is. We have to be able to place people in that moment without hurrying them to solution. And unfortunately, when I have seen, and I'm sure there are some people out there who feel like they do a brilliant job, but when I do see the hybrids on the side of inspiration, where you're really trying to just generate that story and really understand and unpack these moments that could be really precious for people, I find that they get glossed over. Or somehow, have you thought about this? Have you tried doing this? And suddenly the solutioning starts to come in. And that's where I'm just like, no, you were so close and don't do it. So that's where I feel like that's where the line should be drawn. And I'll even say for the researcher who's embedded in an organization, when they are embedded, a lot of times you are somewhat biased of the organization and the way the organization functions and why certain decisions have been made the way they have. So if you're really trying to break the barriers and think innovatively of coming up with a brand new product, then your goal in that moment is to actually stop and partner with somebody who doesn't drink your Kool-Aid. And that's what an external researcher would really have play because they have no bias. They have no stake in the game. They're just coming in and listening unabashedly to everything. There's some things that you might have actually closed your ears to because, oh, you know that stakeholder A is never going to accept that.
Yeah, that's true. I can definitely concur with the designer researcher mentality of I'm listening for solutions or things that might inform my solutions or designs. I've seen it done. I've gone into a debrief after a session. Of course, I have the rule, no solutioning here. We're debriefing what they say, and then often they do slip in solutioning when I tell them not to. But they bring up things when they're talking about solutions, or this person said this and they have this problem. And the next step is, and our product can do this for them, or we should design this. I'm never even thinking about those things. I come out of an interview, like you said, focusing on all the little things that they said. Wow, can you believe they clean their house because it's Tuesday and that's when their mother always cleaned the house? Little details like that. And they're already thinking, I need to put a notification in the app to let them know it's Tuesday to clean. And I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. And
it's dwelling in that story a little bit as well. If I suddenly in the middle of this conversation said, and by the way, I didn't tell you, Jen, I actually want to ask you about how you invest your extra money that you have at the end of every month. How do you actually invest it? And you're just going to be like, oh, and you got to stop and you're going to probably think about it. And then if you give me an answer, it might be the answer. And when people say people just give you like an answer to please you, it's not about pleasing you. They just want to answer the question and feel like they're actually capable at a moment and also servicing the need of being a participant in answering your question. But nobody goes in to say, I'm going to give a completely shoddy response to Jen today because that's what I want to do. Nobody goes in with that intent. So it's important to get people to take a moment to unravel that reality. But it's equally important for the people listening to almost take 2x the amount of time to process that, to go through it and to think about what all Jen just told me about. Wow, so her mother cleaned on Tuesday. Like, that's really interesting. Is it attached to habit? Is it attached to nostalgia? What are we talking about here? Does she clean the same way as her mother? Or maybe doesn't clean anymore because she is trapped in a house where it was so clean. She doesn't want to feel like there's something much greater that we need to understand. Because when we think about these 4 ways of describing, human existence, where we have behaviors, we have aptitudes, we have attitudes and emotions, our behaviors and our aptitudes change very rapidly, but our attitudes and emotions are a bit more long lasting. So we want to go after that data, but yet I'm a designer, and again, nothing against my designer friends. Your focus is to act. Your focus is to solution. So you want to know what somebody's doing in that moment. How they're thinking about something, what their perceptions are toward it might not be as important because you don't feel it services your solution, but it actually does for a much greater, longer time if we can give it just a little bit of time to percolate.
How do you recommend getting your team to percolate on those things a little bit longer?
Great question. So something that we do, and this comes down to process, this comes down to practice, is when we actually start out, and again, we are an external consultancy, and I tell, I teach at Bentley University. I tell my students the same thing, whether they're internal or external to a company. When you start, the goal is to make sure that people understand the entire arc of your qualitative research study. So it's not to say that just give me your questions, then I'm going to run away, and then, hey, join us on this day and you can listen in. It's to tell them at every step, this is how we're going to work together, because it's not for one researcher or two researchers, even to just listen and to disseminate that information to the team. It's for the team to immerse themselves in that listening. And it's not to say it has to be in context, whatever form it's taking, whether it's in context, in person, remote, they have to be listening. They have to be fully present. And I use that word very intentionally, but they have to be fully present to listen to what this person is telling us about how they're cleaning their house, if we take that example. And we set that timeline from the beginning of our studies, and we give very specific dates and very specific tasks. This is when you are going to have to be present. This is when you do not have to be present. In fact, go away. And it's very important for them to understand that they are not bearing the burden of that process. They're simply being shepherded through it. So when we tell them we give them an orientation. This is our protocol now. We would have collaboratively constructed that protocol. Here's the protocol. Here's your orientation. As an observer, as a listener, this is what you're going to do. Here's how you're going to take notes. Here's where you're going to take notes. Here's what we're going to do after every session. We're going to debrief. So if the session, let's pretend, is an hour long, their calendar invite will be for 90 minutes because they have to be there for the debrief. And it's time that we ask for even before we start recruiting, so way up front. And it's to give them that expectation that there is structure to the process. There is intention in how we do our work so that they're like, okay, I get it. So then we do this. And then if we all have a moment where we can percolate, you are responsible for your own notes, Jen. You have to take your own notes and you're going to look through them. And then once we've finished all of our data gathering and our little mini debrief, we are then going to go into a phase of analysis where we have a raw data workshop. We simply talk about the data. Talk about things that are interesting. It is highly facilitated. So it's not to say that it's a free-for-all, but it is intentional because let's say I'm making this up. You have 16 participants. We are going to go through every participant in a way that helps us hear. What did Jen feel she heard? What did so-and-so feel they heard? Who else heard something? And then suddenly somebody goes, wow, Jen, you heard that? I never heard that. Or wow, Meena, you said this and I didn't know where you got that follow-up question from. Can you help me understand? Oh, good question. But it gives the team the permission to not jump to conclusions, but to simply discuss. Because to me, that is, in my world and the way we function as an organization, is that's where the magic actually happens. I always use the analogy of a tree, right? You're climbing a tree. You want to get to the top of the tree. The top of the tree is your presentation. But if I take somebody and airlift them to the top of the tree, if they look down, they're never going to understand why certain branches were avoided, why certain branches were leveraged. But if you are part of that moment where you're talking about things very organically and you're climbing the tree and you go up a branch that we almost got to the top, but the branch got really weak, then you're going to come back down and go to the right and go to a different branch. If you are part of that, you will be less quizzical or challenging of what you hear in the final presentation, because to you it makes sense how that all came about. And it doesn't have to be incredibly time consuming either. Some people will think, great, I don't have hours in the day, Meena. You don't need hours in the day. But if a process is put together with little bits and bytes all along the way, where those breadcrumbs are dropped, we don't lose people.
Right. So you're saying have your partner not only observe the interviews, but participate in the analysis as well?
They have to, because at the end of the day, we are definitely experts in what we do. We're very confident of it. But we don't know the domain. We don't know the background as well as you do. But what we're doing is helping you bring structure to how you get answers to your questions, because you and I have spoken about this at length. Research is just the act of getting answers to questions. That's really what it is at the very basic level. So let's not scare people with this word research, but when you have a question and you want an answer, nobody says, just give me an answer. I don't care. People want a high confidence answer. They want an answer that they can build on. They want an answer that gives them strength to be able to move forward, or inspiration, or something that gives them that internal or intrinsic confidence to say, this feels right. This feels great. And it's not just one person who should feel that. It needs to be an aligned moment. That alignment is imperative.